Welcome back to our channel and to our continuing series of videos on the spiritual disciplines. If you have been following along with me throughout this series, you will likely have noticed a bit of a pattern to our videos. You'll note that the first video on the topic or discipline is where I usually touch on the biblical basis for the importance and instruction of the discipline. And then the following video or videos, depending on the particular discipline, are devoted to explaining the discipline itself and practical steps to implementing it into your Christian life. For this topic, this series of videos here, however, I'm going to spend the first video outlining what the discipline is all about, and then in the following videos move on to the biblical basis and then practical implementation. I hope you will stay with me as we work through all those steps. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you don't miss out on anything. And we do welcome comments, and I would love to hear from you on what you have been learning as you've been listening to and working through this series on spiritual disciplines. Now, in this video, we're going to begin a study of the spiritual discipline of solitude. Now, if you have been reading through Richard Foster's book, Celebration of Discipline, which we've been drawing on heavily for this series, you will note that he titles this chapter with only the word solitude, the discipline of solitude. He is really talking about both solitude and silence as working together to accomplish a deeper relationship of presence with God and of hearing his voice. So in these videos, I will be pairing solitude and silence together as complementary to the process. And when I began this video series on spiritual disciplines, I noted that you will find many of the disciplines overlapping with one another. This is one of those disciplines where this overlap is very evident. You will find it combines very nicely with the disciplines of meditation, prayer, and study that we have already spent time looking at. If you have not yet watched those videos, go back and take a listen to them, and they will really fill out how all of these begin to work together to benefit your spiritual growth. We'll provide links to those previous videos in the description below here. Now, during this time of COVID-19 isolation, it might seem a bad form to be talking about solitude as a good thing. Even those of you who are introverted and had no difficulty with the initial stages of staying at home in relative solitude may now be eager to be getting out of the house and having at least some interaction with other people, face-to-face, in person, not online interaction. Now, those extroverts among us likely have been climbing the walls since day one, and the thought of actually choosing to include solitude and silence in your lives sounds alien and something akin to unusual and cruel punishment. And yet, this particular season that we are in with the COVID-19 shutdown and restrictions has given us and maybe forced us to engage in the early stages of developing a discipline of solitude. If nothing else, it has forced us to slow down in our busy lives and allow for space to pause, reflect, and be still. I know this will not be easy for many of us, but it is in the moments of solitude and silence that we can find and hear the voice of God speaking gently to us. Now, what is solitude in the light of being a spiritual discipline? Well, one definition, and I think one that captures this very well, is solitude is choosing to be alone so that we can be with God. Solitude doesn't mean that we need to abandon the fellowship of people or community and take up residence in the middle of a desert and live as a hermit. In fact, it is entirely possible to be physically absent from people and never experience the gift of solitude. Seeking solitude is the intentional act of creating space and time to tune out the noise and busyness of our lives and the world around us so that we may be better able to tune into the presence of God. Now, this can be as brief as a few minutes of quiet and before the rest of the family wakes up, or as lengthy as a week-long personal retreat in a cabin at a lake. Jesus spent 40 days in solitude at the beginning of his ministry. You see, we are overwhelmed by noise and distraction in our world today. Either it is because we don't know any different, or we somehow fear the quiet. But whatever the case, we surround ourselves with background noise. Take a moment to think about your own home. Many of us, and especially if we have kids, have at any given time some form of music going on, with the TV turned on perhaps in a different room, and all the while we are simultaneously doing several different home-related activities and trying to achieve the next level in Candy Crush on our phones. Maybe that is a bit more than the average, but how many of you this morning woke up and immediately turned on your phone, your smartphone, to see what news feeds, emails, or messages you may have missed during the hours you were sleeping? And this is all before actually getting out of your bed. Or, and I am guilty of this, you walk into a room or your office at work, or wherever it happens to be, and immediately you turn on the radio or your favorite playlist on your phone or something like that. I'm sure you get the picture. So much of our time is spent being surrounded by noise. Solitude is intentionally creating space, internally and externally, to turn off as much of that noise as possible in order to focus your attention on God and what He might be saying to you. Now, connected to solitude is the idea of silence. Now, certainly, silence can be included in the efforts to reduce the noise of distraction around you, but it is also an action that you take. Listening to others, to God, requires silence on our part. Too often we are people who feel the need to fill lulls in our lives with words. Think back to meetings or group conversations when a lull occurs. It is uncomfortable and we don't know what to do. And it isn't long before someone says something, and often that something spoken isn't really offering anything of value. It is just trying to bring a measure of false comfort. And my kids are really good at this, especially if they are unsettled because they have just recently gotten in trouble for something. They try to fill the quiet space with nonsense noise in the hopes that there won't be any room for us as parents to lecture them any further, or to provide a comfort around them, a wall, a shield against maybe the uncomfortable silence of guilt that they're feeling. Our quiet time with God is often filled with similar activity. We are uncomfortable with the quiet, and so we fill it with our own voice, when it is God's voice that we should be listening for. And if you are unsure about the truth of this, think back to how hard it is to sit in a church service or a prayer meeting when there is allowed for a few moments of silence for prayer. What is really only 30 seconds feels like several minutes, and maybe even for some, an eternity. Now, as I mentioned, this is probably going to be a challenging discipline for many of us to put into practice in our lives. But I would encourage you not to give up. Encourage you to not give up. Join me in the next video as I touch on the importance of the Bible places on this spiritual discipline. Well, until then, let me remind you of the words from Psalm 46, verse 10. It says, "Be still and know that I am God."